Hello again, Fish-A-Lots. In this video, I want to cover all the little nuances in your gear that could really make or break your day out on the water fishing with soft plastic flukes. And these are some of the lessons that I learned in over 20 years of fishing with these things and their fish catching machines. I'm going to share that with you today. And all right, so let's start with the gear here, and we'll start with the reels first. So you could use a baitcaster reel for fluke fishing, and you could use spinning reels for your weightless fluke or even weighted flukes. The one thing I would advise though, both reels work just the same. They work equally as good, but with a baitcaster, especially if you're a beginner or you're an intermediate level fish-a-lot out there, right? You know, you're just not on the water every single day. Casting weightless lures and really light lures can be difficult with baitcasters, and it can result in a lot of backlashes. And the more tangles you have, the more frustrated you are, the less you're fishing, the less fish you're going to catch. So for most anglers out there, I would recommend a spinning reel just because it's going to be way easier to handle, way easier to cast. You're going to have way less tangles, and it works just as good as a baitcaster. All right, so your size of your spinning reels. This is a 3000 Daiwa Fuego. You could use any company you like. I like the Daiwa Fuegos, very smooth, very nice. I also like the PC Fun Nautex or the PC Fun Carbon X2. I've been using those reels for a while. If you like those type of reels, I have real reviews on them. I can even save you 15% with this code right here. Just type that in, I'll save you some money. But any reel will work, to be honest with you. But 3000 size is what I like because it's the most versatile. It has a lot of line capacity, it's a lot of torque, a lot of power, and it's pretty light. So you can cast with this thing all day long and not get tired, and that's exactly what you need for constantly casting something like a fluke all day so that you can focus on the retrieve of your lures and, you know, not get fatigued. So 3000 size reel, this catches everything. You'll see this with me striper fishing, fluke fishing, cat fishing, largemouth bass fishing, you name it, it could do it all. And all right, so next up, let's talk about the rod. Now, my recommendation for rods and just most lure presentations for inshore fish are going to be a medium power rod and moderate action. The reason for that is because I actually want a lot of shock absorption in the rod for two reasons. One, it allows me to move this fluke through the water just right, exactly how I want it. The other reason is if you have a heavy power rod and an extra fast action rod, you know, the slightest little movement on the rod, there's not a lot of bend, there's not a lot of give to it. So the slightest little movement is going to make the most erratic movements of your fluke. And it's much harder to slow your presentation down with that heavy power rating and that extra fast action rating. Keep in mind the power of the rod. That rating just means how much force you have to exert on the rod to get it to bend. And the action rating just means where on the rod it bends. So that heavy power or medium heavy power and extra fast recommendations that you hear all the time are just terrible, and it's going to cost you so many fish. A, because most people don't have the discipline to slow it down to get a subtle retrieve going to trigger those finicky bites. And when you do get a bite, it's got instant torque with that broomstick of a rod, and a lot of times you're going to get fish lip soup, rip the lures out of the fish's mouth, or you don't give this hook enough time to turn in the fish's mouth because you're just ripping it out as soon as you feel a fish or as soon as you see a fish, and you're going to miss a ton of strikes and fish like that. Now, part of the bad advice out there for extra fast action is you need extra power to punch that hook through the fish's mouths. Well, you know, fish like largemouth bass just don't have that tough a mouth. And take a look at this. These are striped bass. These are 40-inch big old striped bass out here. I'm using this exact setup with a fluke and a hook, and no problem at all penetrating these fish's mouth. They got tough mouths. These are big fish. There's zero problem. So I caught a ton of fish. A lot of other guys out there using the wrong gear, especially for soft plastic fishing, came up empty-handed, and that's because they were picking the wrong gear and they were listening to the wrong advice. But Johnny Fish-A-Lot has it covered. Moderate action rod, medium power, 3000 size reel will do you just fine for all sorts of weightless fluke fishing or even weighted fluke fishing. All right, next up, let's talk about your fishing line. I don't recommend in an inshore environment going any lighter than 10-pound test line on your main line. Now, if you want to use 10-pound test line of mono, that's perfectly fine. There is nothing wrong with having some stretch in the mono and having that shock absorption. That stretch kind of adds to my point of the medium power rod and the moderate action rod, and that you do want some shock absorption so you're not pulling the hooks out of the fish's mouth. Now, the problem with mono is that it's going to limit your casting range, right? So braid, like I have baited on right here, is going to allow you further casting range, but there is no stretch in braid. So what I really recommend, regardless if you're using mono or blade, both of which tend to float until you get it waterlogged, is you have braid and you connect that to your you connect that to your fluoro leader right here. Fluoro is going to want to sink, and that's going to help get your lure, your fluke, down in the water column as opposed to riding up. They're going to want to rise as you start jigging them, as you go side to side. And so that fluoro that I got rigged up here is going to help keep that down. Now, a couple of things with your line that's going to give you a little bit of a headache is tangles. So as you start working this fluke, right, you're going to work it just like a jerk bait almost, right? Side to side motion. You know, the fluke will tend to kind of have a mind of its own. And if you jerk it a little bit too hard, you're giving too much motion, it could twirl on you and it could give you some tangles. So as you work this, it's going left, right, upside down, all over the place, and you could reel back just a tangled mess in your leader material. So some ways to avoid that is if you have braid, you could use a braid to line connection to your fluoro right here. And this is going to be an FG knot, and it's going to be perfect for alleviating those line twists. Braid is very, very difficult to twist and tangle, unlike mono or fluoro is. So just using a line-to-line connection to a fluoro leader, okay, I recommend at least 14 inches for your leader. That'll give you more than enough to get this fluke working and to get this fluke down in the water column. And that FG knot is going to come through your guides with no problem at all, so you don't have to worry about it. The other option you could have is a barrel swivel. Okay, barrel swivels are pretty good because if you're using mono or fluoro, again, and that line starts to twist on you, okay, that barrel swivel will turn and it won't tangle your main line, and that will be ideal. Now, sometimes with a barrel swivel, you'll actually have the barrel swivel spin itself with your line, and that can cause tangles in your main line as well. Something happens where like something gets caught into the swivel piece and it's just not spinning, and I've had that happen to me before. So a solution to that problem is what's called a ball chain swivel. Now on this channel, I always recommend fishing for lots of different species of fish. I wrote the book on this, how you could catch fish anywhere, right? Anytime, any place, anywhere, using fishing techniques that apply everywhere. Basic, fundamental fishing techniques. And this is a catfish trick we use. This is called a ball chain swivel. And so what happens when you're catfishing is you usually have a piece of bait, okay, hooked on in some current, right? Like river fishing or something where that current is pushing that bait, and you'll sometimes get helicoptering. So if you just use a barrel swivel, a lot of times the whole swivel will spin with the bait, and it's going to have a tangled, massive mess. So with a ball chain swivel right here, look, it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 barrel swivels in there, so it virtually makes it impossible for this thing to tangle, because even if you start spinning or 1 or 2 of these get locked, there's no way that all 7 are going to get locked and it won't spin. So see that? It just spins around nice and easy, so your line can spin, and this is going to stay secured onto your main line, and this is a perfect way to really avoid those kinds of tangles. Now, really quick, we'll talk about hooks in different presentations, just like this for your flukes. For your standard Texas rig baiting, what I recommend is a 5/0 EWG wide gap hook, okay? You want the wide gap in there, so if a fish does bite and compress a lure like that, you do have the space, so you still have a gap in the hook where you could actually get a hook set. Now, I'll put together an entire video of the different riggings that you could do with flukes from beginner to expert, so hit that subscribe button and that notification bell so you don't miss that when it comes out. It could literally change your fluke fishing. All right, now let's talk about some colors. So one of the first tips I have is anytime that you bust a fluke out of like the packaging, make sure you rough this thing up a little bit, okay? Beat it up, roll it up. Here's something like this, like, you know, just massacre it in your hands. break up the salt, get it all spread on there, and break up that color just a little bit. It makes the lure just look so much more natural when you're swimming it through the water. And here's a good example of it. You see this bait? Now this is supposed to be a perfectly white bait right here. Instead, you can see it's got just a little bit of chartreuse in it. It's all beaten up. This fluke right here caught just a ton of fish. This is a Boston bait I use as a 7-inch fluke right here for some bigger fish. And I kind of laid it right next to the chartreuse fluke right here, and so you got a little bit of chartreuse in this white. That is perfect. I absolutely love that. On a lot of my videos, you'll see me with dip in glow. You can buy it at Walmart for like $1. You just take the tail end of the fluke, dip it in that dip in glow, and you just have some chartreuse on the tail end. That is perfect. It just looks so natural, especially if you're fishing around shad and bass feeding on shad. I really, really recommend doing something like that. Just adding a little bit of color to your white flukes. So now let's talk about color a little bit, okay? This is, your classic white. I absolutely love white. This is what I really like to use if I'm fishing around shad or I'm fishing in clear water or open water. This color does really great. Of course, I'm gonna want chartreuse as well. This looks super natural. If you're getting this at depth or you have other fish around, let's say you're saltwater fishing, you have bunker around or even some big shad, this chartreuse really does wonders. And then of course you want something like a dark color, something like this. So if you have dark conditions, dark water, no sunlight, a dark bait will really silhouette under the water column there, and you'll just trigger so many more bites because it's silhouetted and the fish could see this a lot better. And then of course you want like a natural color or translucent colors. That's if you're fishing in really clear water and you have a lot of light penetration. The fish could see very well. Translucent colors will really show up nice and really give it a natural look, and that could trigger more bites. At the end of the day though, don't get caught up in the color game. Most of the time the fish are just looking for the profile of the bait and the action of the bait to trigger strikes. If you do see fish come up, take a look at it and swim off, then maybe add some color, like a little bit of chartreuse to your white. Just give it some kind of different look to it that might trigger some of those bites. But really, that's a tip I have on colors. I don't play the color game too much. It'll drive you crazy. You just need those core colors. All right, now let's talk about the technique if you're actually fluking. Now, I fish flukes a little bit differently than most other people. A lot of people just fish the twitch pause, and that's about it. That's a huge mistake. Make sure you're varying up your retrieves each and every time you go fishing because those fish's preferences change. If I caught fish doing the twitch pause yesterday, it doesn't mean that's what they're looking for today because they changed their preferences. The wind could have picked up. You know, it could have got colder. At night, it could have been freezing. Whatever the case might be. So what I like to do is these typical retrieves. I do the twitch pause. That's a good one. But when you do that, just don't have to do like, a cadence. Twitch, pause. Go twitch, let it sit even longer sometimes, let it sit shorter, or go twitch, pull. That sometimes will give like the lure a back and forth motion, and then it'll kind of jet off. That could trigger a lot of bites as well. I also will fish pretty fast with these, right? I'll just be like twitch as I reel and really burn that bait, and that will trigger some really aggressive fish and get some really good reaction bites. And man, when you get a bite doing that, it is explosive. I do that saltwater fishing and I do that freshwater fishing, and I love it. It's just a really quick retrieve. I'm really burning that bait and I keep it going, and I'm almost trying to rip the bait away from the fish, and it's really a fun way to fish. And the other technique that I use is, you could just do a really slow, steady reel, and then you just kill the bait. And then you just pick it back up real slow, steady reel, and that is for some really finicky fish where they don't want any darting actions. We'll actually turn them off. You can just really slowly reel that thing, and this fluke, if you rig it right, will just swim straight right through the water column and then just kind of float down and die, and then get picked up and swim real straight and then slow down and die. And vary your retrieve. Slowly reel it in, let it sink, let it fall for a good ways, and then pick it back up. Another trick I have to retrieves is if you are doing real slow every once in a while, just really quick crank of the reel or a twitch with the reel and get that thing shooting up away from the fish. That kind of simulates a fish spotting the bass. Bass or other predatory fish will follow these baits quite a bit, and then when you twitch it and bring it up, they'll come up and they'll grab these things. So again, that's a tip I use for most lure fishing. You just kind of pick the rod up, get that fish moving away from the bass tailing it, and you can usually trigger a strike. Or if the fish are really not finicky, they'll hit on that slow fall, then they'll hit if they're non-aggressive. So So a couple of different retrieving tips right there that you could use, but again, experiment. You're gonna have to sort it out each and every day you're out there on the water. Now, another common mistake a lot of folks will think is that fluke fishing like this is only for largemouth bass, but it's not. So if you wanna see how these tactics with the exact same gear I'm talking about for largemouth bass, another inshore species of fish, and how all this works together, go ahead and click on this video right here where I'm using these big old guys to catch us a ton of fish and absolutely have a ball.